Thanks, Alex, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. And for those regular viewers of Conservative Voice, this is the 30th hot seat session and the 8th in the last 12 months on a virtual basis. Tonight, of those 30, this is the highest audience we have ever had. We normally creep up towards 100 with a cabinet minister. Tonight, we have over 120. We had to open up the admissions to take in an extra few, and an absolute delight to have the Secretary of State for Defence this evening, Member of Parliament also for Wyre and Preston North, someone who really understands the North. And what a demanding week he's had. And I think you would like to know, as I always do, just a few background points. The first one is that he has a fascinating background. Sandhurst, the Scots Guards. Ben Wallace was mentioned in dispatches, leading a patrol capturing an IRA active unit. He happened to be on duty when the Princess of Wales died, and there was the guardsman sent to bring back the body from Paris. A former member of the Scottish Parliament, and against some people's expectations, he achieved what is a fantastic financial settlement from the Treasury. And something that's not widely known, I think, is that Boris was the first person to identify Ben was the first person to identify Boris Johnson as a future leader of our party, well before he was even a member of Parliament. Secondly, for Ben Wallace, loyalty and commitment are key issues. He often compares politics with his operational duties of years ago. And I think it was during the leadership contest, his sincerity, his principles and his values actually shone through. And a couple of quotes just to give you a feel of that. He said, "You learn who to trust, you learn who is honourable, and you learn who your friends are." And again, governing is a serious business. It is not a game of war, nor is it a role play for the House of Cards. He is, finally, before I ask him to speak, an incredibly good company. I think I first met him, I recall, at Boris Johnson, the by-election after he became mayor. We had a wonderful evening canvassing, but more importantly, I'm sure you would all recognise this, we were determined to get and have a good evening, enjoy each other's company in the pub. He's a great team player. We're very fortunate to have him at all, let alone this week. Ben, over to you.
Thank you, Don, and thank you very, very much for inviting me along. And the Conservative Voice is one of those brilliant organisations that really not only promotes the members in this party, it also, I think, reminds the party that there is more to Conservative Party than SW1 and west of London. You know, as a Northern MP, I in fact won a seat under the Labour government in the north of England. I won Lancashire and Wyre, and before the Red Wall, I Preston North, which is a proper mill town northern city, as it was made in 2000. So it's great, you know, Northern Conservative Voice, because we are a party that should always reflect the whole of the United Kingdom and not just what's in fashion in CCHQ off the day. And you know, when you were ploughing a fairly lonely field, as I was, first of all in the Scottish Parliament elections in 1999, up in northeast Scotland, or indeed in the northwest of England, where there weren't many other Conservatives, it was quite a lonely affair. And Conservative Voice has definitely, Don, brought that way into the forefront, people's voices, and I think that is important. Otherwise, we end up with a party of clique, and no one wants that. And we've never had that. That's not a Conservative way. So I'm very pleased to come and support tonight and give you a reflection on the week and indeed the Defence Command paper, because first of all, I'm certainly lucky that I am the first Defence Secretary since the Cold War to have a significant budget rise, and a real budget rise, not a theoretical efficiency saving that is allowed to be planned back into the department, but genuine cash, genuine hard money. I've actually cost the Exchequer £24 billion over the next 4 years. I suspect there's a voodoo doll somewhere off me in the Treasury. In fact, I think it's going to even be higher than 24 billion. But it needed to happen. The Prime Minister recognised that it had to happen, that Britain's global power is as much hard power as it is soft power, and it underpins what we do around the world and underpins our values. It's also that there was the case of nearly 30 or 40 years of what I would describe as playing pass the parcel with defence. You know, that everyone put money off for the next year, or hollowing out equipment. And eventually the music stops and you open the parcel and, you know, it was going to stop. And that would be very, very damaging. You would have seen ships tied up. You would have seen exercises and operations cancelled. And you would have seen a whole range of equipment not progress. So the Prime Minister stood absolutely up to make a very, very important decision with a bit of risk. I mean, if you think about other departments not getting settlements for a year in the middle of COVID, but he realized it was important. And I've been incredibly lucky, but it also means that we have the room and the space to make very, very important modernizing decisions. Now, there's a famous phrase, Don, that was Earl Haig once said that there is always a place on the battlefield for a thoroughbred horse. And there is a clue in all of that, which is threat moves and we must move with it. Otherwise, we end up like the poor old tragic Polish cavalry, if you remember, against the Blitzkrieg in the Nazis. You end up being in snatched Land Rovers when you should be in something else. And you also end up effectively having a gap between the paper strength you boast about and the simple reality. And that final bit is the bit that I experienced in Germany, in the BAUR, in the very beginning of the 90s, where on paper we fielded 3 divisions, but in reality we probably had 1.5. When we went to the first Gulf War, we simply literally cannibalized the whole lot. And you know, that's not the right thing to do. The Americans know that. Other countries know it. I suspect a lot of other countries are in similar positions. Or you end up boasting you've got lots of frigates, when in fact, if I go to Portsmouth right now, I will see 2 Type 45 frigates or destroyers lined up, literally wrapped in plastic, not going anywhere. And that doesn't do anything. It doesn't make our enemy or our adversaries change behavior. And it actually fundamentally lets down the men and women who put their lives at risk to defend us. So if this paper is anything, Donna, it is an attempt to say that what you're going to get we are going to do what you put on the tin. It is going to deliver what we say. And it is a plan for our defense that matches our ambition and our resources in a way that I don't think we've ever had before. And it's going to be led, and it has been led, by threat. So 9 months ago, I started by saying to the Chief of Defence Intelligence, we're not going to look at the spreadsheet of different capital and resource budgets. We're going to start with what is the future? What is the future battlefield? What is the future that our adversaries are going to use against us, both in the next few years and in the next 10, 15, 20 years? And let's shape our services that way. And that's difficult because I can tell you, as a former Scots Guard whose regiment was 379 only a few weeks ago, 379 years old only a few weeks ago, is defence is full of sentimentality. You know, we love our traditions, we love that the history is carried in us, but it therefore it also sometimes makes it a barrier to reform. And so people will be able to criticise this paper, and some of my own benches have. But we haven't made it in the way it's been done in the past, whereas changes have been made dressed up as reform because, in fact, there was really a cut. So we have a rising tide. Our capital budget is going up. I will spend over the next 4 years £195 billion on defence. You know, it is a rising budget that takes us into almost double-digit percentages overall. And make us one of the biggest defence spenders in the world. So we made decisions based not on false choices, and I refused to hollow out, push things off to the right, or year 5 or year 7 that always come back to haunt us, and took a view that what is it we can see from the threat and the battles of today, and indeed how are we going to get ready for it? Because the clue is in our name, defense. That's my job, to defend, lead a department that defends the nation at home, defends our values abroad, defends our allies abroad, and furthers British interest. And this paper will do it. It sets out the threat, it sets out the global trends, so something like climate change and the impact of that. It sets out the new weaponry that the enemy has and the adversary, and then sets out how we're going to apply our forces, and then what the forces will need to do to change. And then finally, but most importantly, what are we going to do to invest and create a new workforce of the future? And what we learned from Iraq and what we learned from the battlefield of today and our adversaries is a number of things. One is, you can have all the war fighting you like. You can roll up Saddam Hussein's army in a matter of days. But if you then don't have the follow-on forces to actually configured and skilled to win the peace, you actually end up in Basra, where militia, Iranian-backed militias are attacking British people, and we are sitting there in an armored brigade configured for a mass war fight rather than a conflict resolution or indeed a peace building. Or if you don't have forces that get in early, you end up in a war. And an example like that would be some of the countries in Africa. So Mozambique right now, where there is rampant ISIS growing in that space. At the same time, the Russian mercenary gang called the Wagner Group are very well equipped and linked to the Kremlin group of mercenaries who are there to, to influence the political system or to ensure that Russia wins mineral assets. You end up with a fragile state getting over more fragile and eventually descending into complete conflict, and then eventually spreading in the region. So you have to be in the business, in a sense, of conflict prevention by providing resilience to your friends, or by just providing presence. Would Russia have done what it had done in Georgia and Ukraine if we'd actually been there? Maybe if we'd just been there on exercise for 6 months. Maybe if the Americans had had a base there. It makes them think. So presence is important. So this is going to produce the range of capabilities that we need. War fighting, 2 armor brigades, a strike recce brigade, aviation brigade. But I'm going to take some of the money and make sure they are properly protected from modern weapons like UAVs and long-range artillery. That's what we call deep fires. And in conflict prevention, we're going to take the regiments and the infantry and the units that train people, and we're going to invest in them and their equipment to make sure that they can go beyond just training if necessary. They can accompany host forces. They can augment them in a battle, or they can give them capabilities and enabling power like intelligence and surveillance capability to back them up. So we force multiply ourselves and assist our allies. And then in post-war fighting, we're going to create battalions such as security force assistance. So what we do now in Baghdad and in Kabul, where we provide security and help train forces in keeping insurgencies and indeed growing threats from within in place. And I think at the same time as all of that, we have to recognize that space and cyber are 2 new domains that we have to bring together and shape, because we are deeply vulnerable in those areas. Western countries rely on satellites. When you go to the cache point, that is linked to a satellite indirectly. When we fire a missile, they require guidance through satellites. When we drive our cars, we use that. That's why Russia has been experimenting and firing anti-ship, anti-satellite missiles. That's why China has started the program of weaponizing in space, because they are less dependent and we are more. And so we have to close off those vulnerabilities. And in cyber itself, if your adversary can spot a single point of failure in your plan, and that revolves around digital communications or I know even signaling on a railway line. They can leave you back in port. You'll go nowhere. You might have the biggest army on earth, but if you quite simply can't get on the car ferries, you're no good. So we have to invest in those. And then finally, we have to reflect the modern workforce. Not only do we need to do more to encourage women into our workforce and BME background people, but we need a range of specialties. We need more cyber people. We need more linguists if we're going to be better defense diplomats around the world. We need to recognize that people live their lives differently. In my day, the man earned the money. Most army wives sat at home or were at home. They couldn't get jobs, and they certainly weren't higher earners. It's quite often now the women are earning more than their husbands in the armed forces, which changes how much they want to move around or go and do, go and suddenly be deployed elsewhere. So we have to recognize that and allow people to enter the armed forces maybe differently, or to come and go, or indeed we got to absolutely embrace once and for all the reserves. The reserves do a fantastic job. They are much better, if you want my view, than my day. They are more skilled, better trained, better equipped. And I have to push the regulars, and there will be a report out soon called R at 30, that they are absolutely an asset and we cannot afford to do without them. And we should get into the habit of using them much better. And I think we will. So that's where we are. My job in the next few months is now to sell this to my allies around the world. I spoke to my Italian counterpart today. I'll speak to my French and Canadians and make the case. And what's interesting is I've already had feedback that actually some of those countries that are still slightly wedded to finding it hard to rotate from the old to the new, or the sunset to the sunrise, as the Chief Defence Staff calls it, I think are quite envious of what the Prime Minister has done. And I think it's a great achievement.